Good evening, Terry. I am so excited for tonight's virtual program. How about you?
I am very excited, and I'm ready for this great discussion, and I love the historical reflections in this tribute of our version of the Black National Anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." So that was awesome.
Indeed, Terry, we must all continue to lift our voice in solidarity and keep marching until victory is won.
Yep, I don't think Dr. King would have it any other way. Indeed.
You are so right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, community members, on behalf of the State College NAACP to our virtual program tonight entitled The Second Letter, a community call to action. When listening is not enough, there needs to be action. And tonight, we have a panel of petitioners, advocates, and activists from our local State College community who were instrumental in rallying, protesting, or even being a co-conspirator in writing the open letters and petitions that were served to the State College Borough, our police department, the Penn State University president, and the State College Area School District.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And this is the a pretty amazing panel that you sort of got here tonight, and also these are amazing community members, which have been marching and moving really in the spirit of Dr. King, and also making some very powerful strides in holding people accountable. So I think this is going to be a wonderful discussion.
That's right, Terry. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we are pausing tonight for reflection and reverence and to celebrate our collective good works toward equity and justice during this week of commemoration. So I thought it would be fitting that we host this panel because discourse demands resolution, and our relentless pursuit of justice continues.
Yes, and in 2019 and 2020 was one of the most difficult years in recent history for not just the community, but also the African American community. It was a year during which Black people were disproportionately impacted by the dual pandemics. Again, I'm talking about the global health pandemic, COVID-19, as well as seeing acts of police brutality in our country. Again, the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and even in our own community with Osaze Azaki. And even this week alone, we had experienced something that we haven't seen, and that I think that we needed to discuss, which was the vandalism and the attempted arson of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Summit County. And this did not happen in 1963. It happened in 2021. It didn't happen in the Southern state. It happened in our state of brotherly love, in Pennsylvania, and that is something that we really have to highlight. In light of these events, and given the climate of the uncertainty that we face in the post-inauguration, it is really imperative to be informed and to galvanize our communities. We cannot be complacent, and we have to really seek the change that we want to see happen.
Exactly. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about each of our panelists for tonight.
All right.
And then I'll ask them to come on back and share an opening statement with us, okay?
Absolutely.
So our first panelist, Dr. Syria Chatters, is the Director of Equity and Inclusivity for the State College Area School District, and she co-leads the SCASD Integrated Mental Health Team. And Dr. Chatters leads equity efforts in the school district and has started initiatives like the Peer Advocate Program, No Place for Hate, the Multicultural Student Success Initiative, and the Diversity in STEM Initiative. Dr. Chatters is also a licensed professional counselor and an adjunct associate professor in counselor ed at Penn State. Now, even though Syria, who's joining us tonight, is not the author of the petitions, but she has agreed to come and help us fill us in to what happened with the student rally demands submitted to the superintendent, as well as the petition that was written to address systemic racism and inequality in the school district that was also submitted to the school board and the superintendent. Now, those two petitions were written by Cynthia Young and Mandy Vactor, but they both cannot be with us this evening, but they did garner well over 1,300 signatures. And their petitions were specifically about the school resource officer contracts and the disproportionate suspensions of our Black and Brown students. And they had 8 requests in their petition. Welcome, Dr. Chatters.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie and Terry. It's wonderful to be here. And firstly, I wanted to send our warm get well soon wishes to Dr. Cynthia Young. We are missing her here tonight, and I am honored to be here in her stead. In my opening statement, I just want to go ahead and read it through, and it says, why demands? Well over 400 years we have been waiting. Although our positions and places may be different, our push for justice is united. Although in my role, I did not author or develop the petition we are discussing today, as a mother, daughter, granddaughter, sister, and Black woman in the movement, I understand and stand in solidarity. The petition we discussed today was authored by the co-chairs of the Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group of the State College Area School District, Dr. Cynthia Young and Mrs. Mandy Vactor. I, along with the district administration and the board, learned about the petition at the same time as it went up on Facebook. Signed by over 1,300 parents, students, and community members, the petition gained the attention of the community and myself in the administration. Many asked, why are these stated as demands? My answer, how well are you acquainted with the fight for racial justice? Have we not asked? Have we not marched? Have we not urged to understand morality and injustice? If any of us had been asking for our humanity for well over 400 years, would our voice rise from a whisper to a yell? When we put it into context, demands do not seem to be enough. In my role, I have been working with the district's administration as we collectively work together and are held accountable by the Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group. I'm here tonight on behalf of the authors of the petition and hope to be able to share our progress, hope to be able to provide opportunities for the community to ask questions, and hope that we are able to work together as we continue to work to move the State College Area School District to a place in which all students are equitably served.
Absolutely. Thank you, Syria. And we'll be back to you in a moment. I'm going to introduce our second panelist, Dr. Ben Jones. He is the Assistant Director of the Rock Ethics Institute at Penn State, and he is a PhD political science from Yale University. He does research in ethics and politics and criminal justice. And for over 8 years, he worked in a nonprofit sector on criminal justice reform, which included directing the campaign that repealed Connecticut's death penalty. Welcome, Ben.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Terry, for hosting and having me here tonight. The first thing I should say is that this petition, which I'll be discussing, Eleanor Brown really took the lead on it. I know you'll be speaking with Eleanor shortly. But the impetus for this was during the summer after the horrific killing of George Floyd and the protests that resulted. This was a demand for action here by the university. And I'll start off by reading a portion of the petition. We believe that there is a fundamental question that the university cannot avoid addressing. If it is in fact true that Penn State sometimes contracts with the State College Police Department, is this ongoing relationship tenable? We note the recent statement of the president of the University of Minnesota, which states, in pertinent part, that the University of Minnesota will no longer contract with the Minneapolis Police Department. If Penn State deems an ongoing relationship with the State College Police Department to be tenable, we hope that you will explain this decision to the university community. Moreover, if the relationship with the State College Police Department continues, we believe it is only reasonable that the university should provide Penn State students, staff, and faculty with an assurance that no officers who were involved in Mr. Osagi's killing will police events at the university. This would require transparency, since Penn State must be able to audit whether the State College Police Department is acting consistently with such an assurance. Furthermore, we ask that you take steps to implement the systemic reforms needed to ensure that incidents like the one that took Mr. Osagi's life do not happen again. And one of the main goals of this petition is the killing of Asazi Osagi happened back in March 2019. And here in the community, as I think others will speak to, there was empty action, calls for, oh, let's have, some study groups, but no real concrete action. And this petition was in part bringing attention to the delay that continued to go on, and also make very clear that it wasn't just the responsibility of the municipal government here in State College, but also the university had a responsibility to act. And so this was a call for action. It's gotten nearly 40,000 signatures, so quite a bit of support, but there's still more work to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to bring in your partner in crime, and together, our third panelist, we welcome Eleanor Brown. Eleanor is a professor at Penn State Law, a professor of international affairs, a senior scientist in the Rock Ethics Institute at Penn State, and she too has earned her JD at Yale School of Law. And both Ben and Eleanor will speak to the open letter, the CARE petition, that garnered more than 39,000 people in regard to Penn State and its relationship with the State College Police Department. And Ben will also speak later about his efforts to prohibit the no-knock warrants in Patton Township. Thank you and welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you so much for having me, Leslie. Thank you so much for having me, Terry. I am delighted to be here. And thank you, Ben, for reading excerpts of the letter. I really am grateful. So I sometimes I'm Jamaican, and Jamaicans have a way of saying, in our dialect, translation to English, so that sometimes you don't choose the Lord chooses you. And that is how I would describe how I became involved. Up until yes, I see Leslie raising her hand. Up until relatively recently, pre-pandemic, I was the chairman of an organization, an academic organization of Black female law professors called Luty Lytle. Luty Lytle was the first Black woman to teach at a chartered law school in the United States. So it's named after her. We were having our annual conference at Penn State Law, where I am a professor. One of the members, who is a friend of mine, a long-standing friend of mine, called me, and I must tell you, when she called me, she was to be speaking at the conference, so I assumed the reason she called me was because of the conference. She called to tell me the very tragic news that her cousin, Mr. Osaze Osagi, had been shot and killed by the State College police. To the day, there are some things in life, my late mother used to say, you know exactly where you were I can tell you where I was, the time, the day, where I was sitting when I got this telephone call. And I mean, I was literally speechless. I had no words. It was immediately apparent to me, several of our members heard the news very shortly thereafter, that a terrible injustice had occurred. He was a gentleman who was experiencing a mental health crisis. The appropriate persons to deal with a mental health crisis are mental health professionals. A mental health warrant was being served. This is not my academic area, but any law professor will tell you that if a mental health warrant is being served, it means that the agents of the state, the police, who are serving the warrant are on notice that the person that they're dealing with is a person who has a mental health challenge. And somehow, with all of this information, they could not figure out a way to de-escalate. And Mr. Osagi ends up dead. He was killed. This struck me as extraordinarily unjust. I felt very strongly about it. I also felt that, as a member of the university community, if the police from this department were involved in university activities, and they're members of the university community like myself who are Black, faculty, students, staff, broader members of the community, it must speak to our safety. If this sort of thing happens, this terrible, terrible, terrible thing happens, and there is not accountability. Now, when I realized that we had to write to the university, was in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in broad daylight, the torture, murder, horrific human rights abuse of George Floyd. The president of the University of Minnesota, which had an arrangement with their police department, which allowed the police department to come onto the campus of the University of Minnesota to police certain events. She made a very strong point of saying, given what has occurred, it is not appropriate for this police department to be policing events at the university. And she terminated the arrangement she had with the police department.
Landmark. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I felt that was very, very important. And I felt that that similar action needed to be taken by our university to say it is what has happened is profoundly unjust. We are not satisfied that we would necessarily even know whether or not there are members of the department who have been involved in these sorts of things, who are then coming onto our campus. And I say that we don't necessarily know because it's unclear that we would know. It is
That's right.
absolutely unclear that we would know. And as such, I felt it was important to make a statement in the same way that the president of the University of Minnesota did, but
Yes.
also as a matter of the basic integrity of the community, particularly with respect to the members who are Black, brown, and also members who may have mental health challenges.
Correct.
And this was the reason that I put together the petition. With the help of many, many persons. Ben and I have been co-authors on op-eds, co-speakers at events.
I tell you, it's good to have a running buddy.
Ben has been steadfast. I'm so grateful.
Yes.
And so that is the background to my saying sometimes you don't choose the Lord chooses you. To use a metaphor from, as I say, Jamaicans would say in our dialect.
I love that.
Yes.
I feel as strongly today as I felt, and I'm very grateful for all the support. It has been extraordinary, the support the petition has gotten. I feel as strongly today as on the day that the petition was written, that you cannot appropriately maintain a relationship with a department like this until these types of situations are dealt with.
Correct. That's so true.
Yes, and again, thank you so much for the time and allowing me to speak today. I'm very grateful.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you, Eleanor, and we'll be back to you in a moment. Let me introduce our fourth panelist, which is Mercer Gary. And she's a PhD candidate in philosophy and women's gender and sexuality studies. And she serves as a graduate liaison for the Students' Restorative Justice Initiative and their task force, and the Pennsylvania Decarceration Bloc, and member of the SCASD Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group. And Mercer will speak to the open letter in response to President Barron's call for a long-term and sustainable community. Their demands for representation on the task force on policing and communities of color, the representation on the Student Code of Conduct Work Group, part of the Presidential Commission on Racism, Bias, and Community Safety. In addition, the petition also calls for defunding and disarming campus police. Welcome, Mercer.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Leslie and Terry. Thanks for all your work in putting this wonderful event together. And thanks to my co-panelists for the fantastic work that you've all been doing around the area and connecting a lot of important movements together. So as we know, it's far from the beginning of this movement, but the spring and summer of 2019 and the mass mobilizations across the country that responded to the recent police murders of too many Black Americans have highlighted the systemic racial injustice in our country, and especially within the current systems of policing and imprisonment. Furthermore, many organizers have noted that this crisis in the United States is not merely the result of bad implementation of good policies, nor even the wrong policies seeking the right aims. Further, the spring and summer have shown us that what we must rethink is what justice means and what it requires from us. So here's where restorative justice comes in. Restorative and transformative models of justice aim to repair relationships and transform the conditions that enabled harm to occur, rather than restoring with retribution and punishment that further entrench patterns of harm and injustice. The Restorative Justice Initiative at Penn State, of which I am part, promotes restorative justice by breaking cycles of incarceration through liberatory education in local correctional facilities, and by supporting the educational aims of current and formerly incarcerated students. SRJI, the student arm of the Restorative Justice Initiative, has been increasingly focused on practicing restorative justice on our own home turf, turning our attention to university discipline and local and campus police. As Leslie mentioned, in the wake of the murders and uprisings, President Barron called for long-term and sustainable community responses to our current moment. We saw the university using the language of restorative justice and wanted to make sure that these were not superficial references, but substantive and lasting changes to university structure and campus culture. following open letters written by the Department of African American Studies, the African Studies program, and the program in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, we, SRJI, wrote to the administration demanding that restorative justice experts be appointed to the numerous task forces and committees that had been created, that the campus police be disarmed and defunded, and that funding from campus police be used to instead fund restorative and transformative alternatives. We received a brief response from President Barron, and our subsequent work enabled us to get further transparency from the university around the University Police Department budget and records, which had previously not been made available to the public. We are currently working with Student Affairs in discussing potential restorative solutions to campus incidences of harm, and are training a task force of students, faculty, and staff in restorative practices that we intend to use on campus to both build community in advance of harm that occurs and to respond to harm where it does occur.
Excellent. Thank you, Mercer. That's fabulous. We'll be back to you in one moment as well. We have two more panelists to introduce tonight. Our fifth panelist is Nanre Nafziger. She holds a doctorate in education theory and policy from Penn State and is one of the founding members for the 320 Coalition. As an activist and an advocate for racial and economic justice, she is also involved in several Pan-African solidarity movements. We say welcome, Nanre. Oh, you're muted.
I think that's the new 2020 call out there.
You're muted.
Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate being here. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the 320 Coalition, and then my colleague, my co-fighter, Jeff, is going to also go into a bit more of the details of some of the things we're going to discuss today. So the 320 Coalition was formed in the wake of the murder of Osaze Osage by the State College Police Department on March 20th, 2019. And there were various groups and organizations in the community working on different fronts, organizing after Osaze Osage was murdered. And these groups came together to form the 320 Coalition. And the 320 Coalition has two key purposes. And these were the original purposes of the 320 Coalition. And the first is to ensure justice for Osaze Osage. And the second part was to ensure what happened to him never happened again. So over the course of the next few months, and now going over almost into 22 months, we have continued to advocate for these two key goals, which we have continued to demand for. But over the course of time, there are, of course, organization changes, it grows, it develops, and we began to think more keenly on what we needed to do to actually ensure that these two areas were met. So there was a lot of work going into a structural reform committee, which Jeff will talk about more specifically. And there was also the work of being on the streets and advocating through direct actions, through actions where we occupied streets, we were involved in various ways in creating space in public spaces for us to advocate directly for justice for Osaze. Fast forward up to June of 2021, after the murder of George Floyd, and the growing national movement to account for all the murders of Black people across America, men and women, and also the intersection of both Black lives and mental health. So Osaze Osage, as others have said here, his murder came at the intersection of Black lives and mental health issues. And so when George Floyd was killed, it was a national moment. And I think activists all over the country came together and said, okay, even though we're talking about George Floyd, we also want to talk about, we're standing in solidarity with George Floyd and all the protesters there and for his life. At the same time, this is a moment in which we're also going to bring other issues to light. And this was a very important moment locally because there was more energy around how can we begin to look at what is happening in State College and in the so-called Happy Valley for Black lives. And so we came up with a petition. I don't know if it's a petition in the same form that the other petitions we've discussed today are. We came up with a list of demands, 10 demands, and Jeff's going to speak more about those 10 demands. But the 2 demands that I'm going to speak about today are more in line with what is going on, are somewhat more in line with what is going on with the Black Lives Matter movement nationally. And the first was that we wanted justice for Osaze, so we wanted the names of the officers who were not named up to about a month ago. We wanted the police officers fired. And thirdly, we wanted them prosecuted for their crimes. That was demand number 7. The other demand that I'm going to speak about today is demand number 10. And demand number 10 is actually a demand for defunding the State College Police Department. And we didn't always use the words defund because they're kind of hot topics here. So those 2 areas are in line with where the broader Black Lives Matter movement sits, which is the 2 things must take place. One, for all the victims that have been lost, there must be justice. And we know nationally almost 98% of cases where police officers kill Black men and women, there's never any indictment and then there's never justice for those cases. So we have to make sure that that happens. That was the first part. And the second part was dismantling these systems which upholds white supremacy and which upholds the system which allows Black lives to continue to be negated. And so we called actually for a reallocation of resources away from the State College Police to vital programs within our communities. And those are the 2 issues that we're going to speak to more today. We've received a lot of community support, and I'm going to go into more details as time allows.
Very good. Thank you, Nanre. I'm going to welcome Jeff, your partner in crime. He is our final panelist to welcome on. I'm glad you could join us, Jeff. You are a lifelong resident of State College and currently a therapist at a domestic and sexual violence crisis center. He has experience providing mental health and substance abuse treatment and is a co-founding member of the 320 Coalition and a member of the State College NAACP. Both Nanre and Jeff, as you know, will be speaking to the 10 coalition demands that arose during a lack of prosecution and transparency concerning the 3 officers involved in the shooting death for Osaze Osage, as we mentioned, and the inadequate internal investigation by the State College Police, the use of deadly force, the disparity of treatment toward people with mental illness, and it all requires police reform. So we have been working hard as a coalition locally with the implementation of the Community Advisory Board, a divestment of guns during the service of mental health warrants, prioritization and clear rules for de-escalation are among the things that we want to see happen, public access to protocols and body cam footage. We want to see the ban of the use of knee holds and choke holds, and other wonderful things along with the long list that we also had previous panelists share with us. And most of all, we want the benefit of public well-being and safety restored. So thank you and welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you to everyone who worked to put on this event. I think this is incredibly important. And I really love hearing about all the supporting and connecting efforts that have taken place over the past year here. And Leslie, I think just really helpfully just named a lot of those 10 demands. Nanre hit 2 of the really key ones, 2 of the really most important ones. And some of the ones that were just mentioned, a community oversight board, divestment of guns from mental health calls, including service of 302 warrants, which are the mental health warrants that Dr. Brown referenced. Those are all things where, in addition to justice and accountability for what's occurred, this is part of the structural, the systemic change that needs to happen going forward to ensure this never happens again. And locally, within the 320 Coalition, and broadly speaking, just as Nanre said, those are 2 of the elements that need to happen in order for justice to not just occur, but be standard practice going forward. I think in terms of thinking about the 320 Coalition and the way that we responded and tried to implement these 3 demands over the summer, First, I would say thank you to Dr. Eleanor Brown for a good summary of, I think, what are some of these especially salient points about what makes Osaze's murder so heinous. There are a lot of local contradictions, and this is what I want to bring up in terms of what happened specifically around June of this past year of 2020. One of the things that was that occurred shortly after the murder of George Floyd is that, of course, there was a lot of interest, there was a lot of concern, there was a lot of energy and attention locally around the Black Lives Matter movement, generally speaking. And that included the local police departments, which, in case folks are not aware, every single local police department that I'm aware of in State College in Bellefonte crafted and put out a statement, not all of them publicly, around basically the need for justice and equity in policing. And not one of those statements mentioned Osaze Osagi, or the fact that we had a shooting and murder of a Black man in our own community for which there was no justice a little over a year ago. And those kinds of contradictions pop up everywhere within State College. Part of what Leslie mentioned in my bio is that I've lived in State College for all of my life, and it's been a lifelong process for me to fully come to see the local exceptionalism that we practice, and especially us as white folks. So thinking about the ways that the community as a whole responded and said, yes, we want to be part of this movement. We want Black Lives to Matter in State College. Well, at the same time, there are glaring omissions, and not accidentally, locally, and there are places for people to plug into the work to recognize that there are efforts that need to be pushed forward, that need to be carried forward in our own backyard, in our own front yard, right? So we put together the list of 10 demands on June 6th, I think it was, delivered them either that day or the next day, in the midst of several different actions that Nanre described. Some of the most important ones, I think, are the Community Oversight Board, which, in addition to the Mental Health Task Force, are currently, right now, in discussion in terms of how they will be implemented. The Community Oversight Board was a recommendation from the 2016 Task Force for Policing in Communities of Color that was put at a low priority. So all these different things come together in addition to mental health rights and disability justice and the movement for Black lives. Those intersect, but so too do just kind of the soft omission of, well, that's not a priority right now. And all of a sudden, when we need confirmation of, can we have an independent investigation into police misconduct, into police brutality, it's not there when we need it, right? So making sure that we are carrying these things forward, some of the demands in that list of 10 are not earth-shattering. Some of them are for greater transparency in terms of release of statistics about police force with regards to race, ethnicity, gender, etc. Not a big ask, but transparency is key. If we don't have that, we have a limited set of information in terms of how we move forward. Just like when we don't know the names of the officers who committed this crime, we don't know if the investigation was transparent. We need to be able to, as a community, know what is being done in our name. We need to know that, for example, when the borough responds to the current lawsuit and says there was a plan for approaching the Osagi mental health crisis call, we need to know that on page 9 of the State College Police Department's internal investigation report, it states, in the words of Officer 1, there was no spoken plan for this encounter. These things are important. They matter.
That's right.
And
they
I
do
think,
matter, Jeff. You're right.
And I think as a community, we certainly saw the upswell of attention, the upswell of engagement, and wanted to engage with our local figures, both in the way of pushing justice forward and in the way of, structurally speaking, reorganizing our community to fit the vision of what we want in terms of justice, in terms of what will make things more livable, more safe for everyone. So we'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I think, Terry, These are our fabulous panelists for this evening.
Yes.
And we have those wonderful opening statements that they have already delivered.
Yeah.
And I do want to circle back to Surya, who shared with us why our demands are made. And what I think is so strategic about this, and I'd like to ask Surya to speak to, all of this is important for people to realize. The discourse is important.
Right.
The demands are important. The resolutions are important. But what does the SCASD resolution reflect to its student body?
Oh, well, that is really interesting, because the anti-racism resolution that came about, it was presented to the school board by a school board member to look at. And at the time that I saw that resolution, we had already received at that point the demands from the students, right? The students had rallied over the summer. And I immediately said, you know, within the board meeting, I said, it's really important that when we are making resolutions like this, that we are including and involving the individuals to which this resolution is meant to impact within those conversations. And so we had students, that the student group that brought forward the petition in the summer, as well as the parent group, the Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group, review that petition. And for, you know, those who attend CCU, we brought it there and a number of other places. So the petition was a collective voice of individuals who had issued these petitions to the district and what they wanted to see happen in the district. But, you know, and I want to also, you know, send a shout out to those students specifically that sat in several board meetings, an entire board work session that was just dedicated to reviewing the petition. They spoke up. Yes. They were completely amazing. They worked hard to get that petition through. But you asked, Leslie, what does the petition mean? I'm going to be quite blunt with you. It means absolutely nothing without action.
Without action, that's it. That's the key.
Nothing.
We remind them, and that's why the second letter is important, because it's a call to action. It's not enough to pledge you're going to do something. You have to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you mind if I bring in all the panelists as well, so we can, because I know that a lot of our questions really is geared towards that call to action. And, you know, one of the things that is so important when we're looking at celebrating MLK and what he stood for is, how do we make sure we hold people accountable for that action, right? You know, and how do we make sure that if folks are not doing what needs to be done, well, how do we replace them? You know, and get folks that can get things done. So I guess, you know, if we can, Leslie, I would love to hear a little bit from Ben and Professor Brown about the no knock warrant, because that is a you know, we recently had, as recently, I mean yesterday, we did.
You're going off track into local politics, but okay. I'll let you 3 minutes on that one.
3 minutes. 3 minutes. Sorry. But this is not local politics conversation. This is the call to engage. I said after that call, the one upset thing that made me upset was the fact that there was only about 4 of us having this conversation. And this has happened again. I know it was the day of the inauguration, so that's fine. But when we talk about the call to action, how important is it for people to be civically engaged during this time?
It's imperative. It is a call to our livelihood. It's for our safety and our own benefit. And people really have to spark an interest and take action when they're asked to a listening session, when they're asked for their feedback. This is the time to show up, not after somebody's dead. We need people in the streets after people are dead. But right now, we need people to put in their 2 cents, call, show up, or write. Do you want people to knock on your door without a warrant and come in your home and shoot you? I don't think so.
Right.
I think that concept of the no knock warrant is hard for us, Ben. And Ben, would you give us a little background on that?
Yeah, so I live in Patton Township, and so this has been part of the discussion there. And after the the protest to the murder of George Floyd, Patton Township started having some discussions around police policy. And so I showed up and was like, okay, if we're going to like have this conversation, let's really look at these policies. And so, one of the things, there's a variety of things that have been brought up, but one of them is, we had the killing of Breonna Taylor, and, officials put out statements saying, this was horrific, what happened, this is a tragedy, thoughts and prayers. And, I think I could probably, a lot of people share this sentiment, they're sort of sick of the thoughts and prayers and want to see actual concrete action. And so if we want to honor Breonna Taylor and other people that were killed unnecessarily, then let's like change the policy and make sure that these things don't happen again. And so this is, when you look at police policy, there's so many policies that are on the books and are just accepted as normal, that do not prioritize the protection of life. And I think this is one very clear example of that. And obviously the lives that are disproportionately harmed by these policies are Black lives. And here in, Pennsylvania, officers, they can't go get a no-knock warrant, but they can still enter a house without knocking and announcing under certain circumstances, some of which prevent the destruction of evidence. I don't think is legitimate grounds to be able to justify going into the house and taking an action that's inherently dangerous. Fortunately, the Patton Township Board has thus far been relatively receptive to some of these proposals. So they will be considering this at their next Board of Supervisors meeting, which is the 27th of January.
I think it's imperative, like you said, that they need to show up. You and Terry both led the charge yesterday with that conversation. And Terry, I would just want you to echo really quickly what you said about ADA concerns and even the speed at which people can answer their door. With an aging population in State College, people should be concerned about no-knock warrants. How fast can you get to the door? How fast can you answer the door if it's the wrong location?
Right. And again, I don't want this to take up the whole conversation either, but one of the things that was really important that was mentioned yesterday was using when these policies and procedures are being created, the voice of people of color, the voice of those with disabilities are not part of that conversation. So just understanding that concept, that should be something that should be included in 2021. I don't think we can play ignorant anymore in 2021. So the other part to this too, and I want to get Mercer as well engaged in this conversation, as well as some of the folks on my right side of the screen, Andre and Jeff.
Well, I definitely think Mercer can talk to us about the restorative justice that she was speaking at in lieu of the punitive that we are used to working in our system.
That's exactly where I was going, Leslie. So right on. So, Mercer, can you dive into that conversation when we talk about that that restorative justice? How does that look, and really, what are some of the things that hold us back as a society in seeing that restorative justice happen?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the question. There's a lot to say, but I will do my best to cover some of the most important parts. I think that we can see I think all of us on this call can see that the current system of punitive justice is treating the symptoms of harm in our society rather than the root causes. So we see incidences of violence, incidences of law breaking that are labeled as violence, including technical violations, punished disproportionately and policed disproportionately. What we are looking at here is instead trying to address the root causes of those violences and repairing the relationships of the community that are concerned when incidences of harm do occur. So restorative justice is focused on identifying the contextual features of any situation of harm and identifying what has been experienced by both the perpetrator and the person who has been harmed. We are focused on accountability, meaningful accountability that includes changing of behavior rather than punishment and disposable throwing someone away, and restoration of the relationships that were harmed. So
I think that's important. And locally, we're having the community conferencing idea is also recircling and trying to begin. Is that correct, Mercer?
That's correct. Yes. What we also are seeing in restorative justice is that we need to be building community proactively rather than just responding in incidences of harm. So we're looking at the university level towards changing the culture of campus and building relationships where people are able to hold one another accountable for the problems that do occur without saying that this is an ultimate verdict on who this person is. And rather saying that we can grow together as a community and we can address the fundamental problems that we're facing rather than just their effects.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think our university president has been stated. He has said that we have an obligation to fight ignorance and intolerance, a model of inclusivity, and embrace the power that the diversity represents and such. But it has proven problematic, right, to get these things implemented on our campus and in our community. I think that's one of the challenges that each one of the petitions are talking about, right? How do we implement these things? How do they get circulated? Even our own Department for African American Studies called upon the university to act. That was one of the petitions that Cynthia Young had started in that department. And on those obligations, they were asking for some concrete and specific ways. They made 6 specific demands. And they too wanted the university to sever ties, like Eleanor was calling for, and the University of Minnesota for the local police, right? And to disarm our campus police. They asked for requests to center courses in African American studies and other appropriate units to make it mandatory as part of the general education requirements on anti-Black racism and their challenges. They asked for additional funding to be reallocated to them for underrepresented faculty to start a center. I think they wanted increased student aid for Black students and increased mental health resources for racial and ethnic minorities. They received more than 1,300 signatures. But again, many of these wonderful demands have yet to be put into action and implemented. Everybody's still talking and the task force are still active. And so Mercer, what you speaking to your demands, they also resonate with everybody else's. And there is an overlap. And if we can embrace the philosophy behind restorative practice and start practicing it and implementing it where we can, I think that will go a long way and could lead to some meaningful change in our culture of racism and inequalities and the mistrust that we are fighting in our community currently.
Could I say something, please?
Yes,
please.
Okay, thank you. This goes really to the previous question you had raised. I had wanted to say it in my introductory remarks, but I was running out of time. I think this is a very, very important point. One of the things that we have learned in the last 2 weeks, when 2 weeks ago, there was an insurrection, a violent, illegal insurrection at the Capitol. There was a very quick recognition after that there needed to be an investigation as to whether or not members of law enforcement may have had sympathies with persons who illegally conducted an insurrection at the Capitol. And there was also recognition that there was a significant representation of white nationalists among the persons who breached the Capitol. Now, the reason I'm saying this, it may seem like an unrelated point, but it is an important point. is that one of the virtues of social media, as problematic as it is in many ways, is it allows you to see in real time what many people are thinking. My sister, just as a quick background, the Divine Nine are the Black sororities and fraternities. VP Kamala Harris is a member of AKA, one of the Divine Nine. My sister is very involved in another sorority, Black sorority. So I have a lot of friends who are in the Black sorority network. What immediately happened on my timeline was a significant number of people expressing a concern that that Kamala Harris might be in what is called an Indira Gandhi situation, in that if you have people in law enforcement who have sympathies to racist doctrines, let me be blunt about it, you need to figure out very quickly who those people are, because it is probably incompatible to be providing just and non-racist policing and to be holding those views. Now, the reason that I raise this issue is we then hear that they are doing a comprehensive search among all 25,000 National Guard members who were assigned to the inauguration. And they're searching them and going through all sorts of information, including their social media feeds. And then we find out that some of them are being removed from the inauguration detail. Now, the reason I am saying all of that is we are in a moment in which there is a recognition that there may be a problem of persons in law enforcement holding views that are incompatible with the just and unbiased administration of criminal justice. And what I am saying is, if there was a potential problem at the Capitol and a potential problem at the inauguration, and resources were spent to figure out who among the National Guard members may have these beliefs, we need to insist that something similar needs to happen with law enforcement. There was no question in my mind when I saw George Floyd's life being extinguished before our eyes, that the man who was doing it did not view George Floyd as a fully human being. He did not view him as a fully human being. And we're not having a candid conversation, as in many of these incidents, as to whether or not there was information beforehand that should have told us these people were problematic that we did not act on.
That's absolutely true.
I have no evidence. Now, the reason that this is important, I am not saying I have any evidence that there is any such problem in our police department. That is not what I am saying. But I am saying that we are in a particular moment in which people are recognizing in the broader public discourse that there may be a problem of radicalization among our law enforcement officers. And if that is the case, we cannot sit on it and pretend we don't see it, because it has implications for these very conversations we're having today. So I think that right now, to go to Leslie's previous question, the question before you went to Mercer, right now is the time for public engagement, because we have a degree of focus on potential problems in law enforcement that we have not had before. And we need to utilize the public focus on those potential problems to say that if you're administering justice on a day-to-day basis in the streets, we need to know that the people who are in the police departments don't have these type of problems. I think it goes to the broader questions of governance and police behaving in ethical ways, and whether or not we're ignoring information that we should have had in the first place.
I think that's what you said right there, Eleanor. That is very applicable to the Osagie case.
Exactly.
The 320 Coalition went and we demanded an internal investigation, and then we got one. And then they had the nerve to say that they only investigated 5 days before and 5 days prior to the incident. That's insanity for anybody.
Can I add to
this?
Yes,
so that is the point. We have to say this now, because people are focused on it because of the inauguration, the Capitol, the radicalization, the evidence of white supremacy in law enforcement, white supremacy. So I'm not saying it's happening in State College, but I'm saying we need to know. Somebody needs to tell us.
That's
what
it.
I'm
And we
saying.
need to investigate it, which is why I think, Jeff, you had your hand raised. I'm going to go to Jeff real quick.
No, I was just saying, I believe it was actually 3 days back and forward that they looked at, not 5. That's all.
Yes, that's. I believe, Jeff, you're right. Now, can I? And I'm not popping up the comments on the screen yet for questions, but there is a couple of comments in here that I really want to sort of highlight in this discussion too, because this goes back to what you were saying, Professor Eleanor, and that is, there is first of all, there was a report done with the DOJ, right, back on the Obama administration, that showed that there was some white supremacy organization that infiltrated law enforcement, and that was a problem. But I actually had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago with officers as well, and we were talking about the Capitol situation. And the reason why I bring this up is, if we know this information, and it is known that there is a level of white supremacy that we have to deal with, the question that I would ask is, how do we address that? How do we actually begin to deal with that issue? And I guess that could be a question for any panelist. I mean, I would like to hear from either Non-Ray or Jeff on this too, because when we look at the 320 coalition and the demands, a lot of it is about really trying to restructure. So I want to know, how does one do that?
Well, I just want to say this. I'll be very quick because I want others to have the opportunity. There is, again, forgive me for being a law professor, there is ex ante and there is ex post. The problem with ex post analyses is often we're doing it when people are already dead. People have already been killed. People have already been shot. My view is, if you are an agent of the state, you're acting under the color of law. You're an agent of the state. It seems clear to me that one of the things we need to be clear about is that you do not have beliefs that are incompatible with your responsibilities. And in the same way that the FBI went in and surveyed the members of the National Guard to make sure they didn't have a problem, we need to insist, when we're doing demands, we need to insist that resources are directed to ensuring that this is not a problem. I really think that we need to be very focused about this. This thing has not been taken seriously enough for too long. And what happens is, after they shoot people is when we find out they had a problem.
Well, correct. And this is why we're trying to get the Community Oversight Board in place. And we will put that call to action out there, because they will ask for the service area of the borough of State College. And that means that 9 people need to be appointed. And even though we have all been very vocal, if we don't live in the downtown borough, we will not be selected for such a committee and oversight. And therefore, we need to be able to vet those people who are being nominated, and we need to do those very checks that you're talking about before they go in an oversight board that will be reviewing footage and making recommendations. So you're correct.
And I'm saying, Leslie, the officers need to be vetted. Officers as well need to be vetted.
Oh, yeah.
That's my point, which will take resources, which requires political action.
Correct. Sounds like we're writing another petition, Eleanor.
You might be right. You might be right. You might be right.
What's one more? We got 6 going now.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think one thing I'll say to your question, Terry, I'm definitely not an expert in terms of law enforcement in many of the ways that you are. But one thing I will say that does fall within the mental health realm is that police departments, I think, generally do require a psychological interview in some standardized testing in order to become an officer. One of the things that I'll bring into this as a member of the mental health community, I recently started volunteering with an organization that helps former white supremacists or white supremacists who want to leave violent far-right extremist groups exit. And part of what's been really interesting about that experience is that the training to become a volunteer doing that is not brand new, but the specific attention to white supremacy and other supremacist ideologies within the counseling, within the mental health context, is brand new. I received, and I've never met another mental health professional who has ever received in their training specific attention to how do we deal with white supremacy and other supremacist ideologies when they show up in our clients. That's a serious gap in the mental health field. And so, when it comes to interviews for police officers to become employed, I can't say for sure that those standardized assessments don't somehow screen for that, but I know that my training in terms of how to work with a client did not include that. Neither, and I'm not just dunking on my program. The program I went through was really excellent in lots of other ways, but I've never heard of a program that does that. I've never received professional development that does that post-graduate school until I specifically went to this organization that does this thing. So I think that is one really important area, and this speaks to Professor Brown's, talking about preventatively, proactively when people are entering into the profession or into a department. There is already screening in place. Are we paying attention to that aspect of it? And I cannot say with confidence that we are.
Anybody else want to comment on that one?
I think your question was, how do we kind of change these systems? And I mean, there's several approaches. There's the legal approach, there's the approach to policy. I think I can speak more about community organizing approach. And of course, what is important to know is that there's no single right strategy for overturning these structures. These structures are very entrenched. They have multiple ways in which they are intertwined, and to even parse them apart, it means that there needs to be multiple strategies. So, and I think that that's something that 320 realized early on, mainly taking, into cognizance some of the, expertise, which is even here in the room tonight, Leslie and Jeff being among, just taking in, and then the direct action strategy, the strategy for structural reform. So there's multiple strategies that are needed, and they need to occur simultaneously. I think a lot of the pressure, and so I'll just speak to three specific things so that I can be very succinct about this. So one, I think in terms of overturning these structures or changing systematic racism in policing and in any other forces, we have to create other structures. So the civil society is not commonly referred to that here in the US, but community organizations and the structures within the community are extremely important. And the stronger those structures are, the stronger the community structures are, the greater is their ability to hold different to hold government accountable. And so if you have like a happy valley where everyone's doing different work and there's not a lot of coming together, it will be difficult to actually address many of these systematic failures and the systemic failures. So it's important that community organization, everything from parents organizations to student organizations to mental health, just everyone is very important, and bringing them together is very important. The second one, which I often say is very important in civil society work, not just in the US, but across the world, is what are you looking for? What is the alternative that you want to create? And this is often where many organizations tend to get stuck, right? We know what we don't want. We don't want the police to kill us. We don't want people to be killed because they have a mental health issue. And, Leslie said it before, no one wants someone to break into their house. But what are the alternatives what is our vision of the society, and how exactly does that work? Because we have a broader vision. We want justice for all. We want Black lives to matter. But when it comes down to the grind, we actually have to have very specific things that we want. So when we talk about alternatives to policing, we know that I might not call the police. I might not believe in the police, but my neighbor might call the police, right? So we have to address that we have to create alternative structures. And Black Lives Matter does that a lot. Like they're very, and this has been, the call for community policing is not new. It's not new in after George Floyd. It's not new in the Black Lives Matter movement. It's decades old. Like Black people calling for community policing, for police out of their communities is as old as the slave patrols, which policing was created. So, but we live in a society where those people that are most affected might not have the power to create the society that they want. And of course, we have to live amongst people who want a different society. So how do we create that? Black people are a minority in State College. If we have this vision and everyone else doesn't have that vision, how can we create an alternative structure? And this is oftentimes where we get stuck.
Right. Right.
I would agree, and that's a good thing. I will ask Syria to talk to us about this only because Syria has been successful in getting members of both sides of the coin to join race and marginalized populations and disability work issues and 4 other work groups that have begun to champion these various issues, even in the school district. And so that's just one big systemic, vehicle, but it could possibly lead to community organizing in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and I want to agree 100% with what Nanre just stated, is that there's multiple approaches and they have to work in concert with one another. And I think that being inside of an organization as a director, it's a very difficult position to be in, because one of the key things is I am well aware that justice is a long time. It's a long time coming. And to say that, my grandparents, parents have all been, and where I am now, I get from them. But the other side of it is when you get into roles like this, you are then tasked with following policies and following processes and organizational change theory and all those kinds of things. So one of the things that I'll say, several of the things that I've been working on, is I believe that in order for an organization, one of the key things is an organization has to move away from the process of working to try to hold itself accountable. That is, kind of like they say, you don't want someone who benefits to be the person who is watching over an organization. So one of the key things in getting work groups started was to have community groups that are holding us accountable for what we are doing, and have inside access to what is going on at the same time as we are working toward becoming more transparent, because transparency and accountability are 2 of the key factors in order for organizations to move forward. Because if people have no idea what is going on in the inside, how can they hold you accountable for what they don't know? And so the work groups was just part of that. But at the same time, one of the things that I think is really important is the individuals who are stakeholders within the organization also have to be educated on what is going on in the organization. And one of the primary stakeholder groups within schools are students. And so one of the key things is that if we are not, in many cases within our curriculum, we are not providing education for students to be able to see, recognize, and fight against injustice. And those are key factors that came about throughout the founding of the civil rights movement. All of the movements prior to that was being able to see, recognize, and know how to fight against injustice. And that is some of the key pieces that are missing out of our history book. So one of those key factors for me was then instituting within our educational institutions social justice courses. The Peer Advocates program was a start, but I really think that students should be receiving credit for this type of education, and it should be deeply integrated in their curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade. There isn't a reason that a student should be, what I say, learning social justice by fire hose, so to speak, to where we are shooting all of this information at them all at one time, to where they do not have the opportunity to properly and developmentally appropriately absorb it. And so that is one of the key things in working to restructure our entire social studies curriculum, and then moving to integrate that into other areas of our curriculum as well. English, math, science. There should not be an area of the curriculum that you hit that you are not learning about history, multicultural history, social justice, diversity, equity issues. And then lastly, but most importantly, when it comes to policy, I think that it's extremely important, because policies are those bones that form our organizations. And if the bones are not right, absolutely nothing else within the organization is going to work. However, one of the key things, which someone had said earlier, I'm trying to remember who, but we as an organization, we needed to be audited. And I thought that it was extremely important that an outside entity audit us. And so that is something that we are under right now. We are being externally audited by the Equity Literacy Institute, which is the leading institute within the US that does equity audits for K through 12 organizations. And right now we are undergoing that. That will help us to finally develop the policy changes that need to happen, the change to our code of conduct, the change to all of our handbooks that need to happen, the overhaul of our curriculum, and also integrating all of this information into an action plan that is going to have, we say, timelines, right, which is extremely important. And then publishing the equity audit publicly so that the public can see this data and then work collectively to hold us accountable.
I think that's really important. And I just want to draw that parallel because you're talking, Nanre is talking about community organizing, and that's what you're doing within the schools and these subgroups and these additional populations that are pushing for the oversight, which is what an equity course scorecard does as well. So if every one of the panelists can talk to me for a moment briefly about the pushback and the roadblocks that you experience in trying to do this innovative community organizing to get your work done, because that's what we are doing. I mean, all 8 of us, all of our spheres of influence overlap, and we have been working in the community spheres, overlapping positions to try and have these work groups, task force, community oversights implement these changes. And each one of us have roadblocks to share. So let's put those out and be transparent about what we're facing.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Roadblocks. I know you guys got some now.
So I can share one, and this I think ties in nicely with the commemoration of Dr. King. When he talked about, if you go back to his writings, he talks about one of the goals of civil disobedience was to precipitate a crisis so that people could no longer ignore a pressing social problem. And one thing that has just been so obvious to me and really, really troubling is the local response to the COVID pandemic versus the local response to policing issues. And when COVID hit, there's this research out there. It shows that masks are going to protect us. This is what we need to implement to be safer as a community. Did we set up a task force to study it for over a year to decide whether or not to put masks on? No.
Nope.
People had already done that research. We knew what the answer was, so we could just implement and run with it. Whereas when it comes to policing and protecting Black lives, protecting lives of people with mental illness, let's just set up another study commission and just, sit on this forever. And it's getting people to realize that this is a crisis that requires us to act now rather than to put this off until people forget about it.
Oh, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point.
To go to that point, Ben's point says goes very well with something with the point that I was trying to amplify earlier. In that, what I'm saying is it is very, very rare. We have known that law enforcement may have had persons who are susceptible to white nationalist recruitment for some time. There are reports that say this. We have not been acting on it. What led us to act on it was the reality of the inauguration, and to be sure that people could be, that people who are being called upon to provide security functions at the inauguration did not hold these beliefs. So my point is, just like Ben's, when there's a situation of urgency, people don't need to study because the work has already been done. So that for me is the law enforcement equivalent of the COVID pandemic analogy that Ben just gave. And the question is, how do we get more of that going?
So I'll speak, and then Jeff can follow me. Since we kind of divided up the work of 320, how we discussed this. And so I'll continue speaking specifically about the community and then a little bit about the political pushback. So one of the roadblocks we face, as many organizers do, is community fatigue. So the fatigue of, being on the streets. Oftentimes, even Martin Luther King talks about this, the winter, I forget what he phrased it. I wish I had it here. But he talks about how in the winter, the U.S., because of its particular, weather system, it's so interesting. I don't know who studied this, but in the summer, there tends to be a lot of protest. And this has occurred throughout U.S. history, with hot summers and protests on the streets, and people are ready to be out there. And then you kind of go into the winter and things calm down. And it's really a serious problem of recovery. So I'm speaking directly about like our direct actions, our street occupations, our protest marches, our taking of the streets. We faced often this, the community coming out. So for instance, when George Floyd was killed, there were thousands of people on the streets. I think it was probably one of the biggest protests State College has ever seen. And then you go down and you have like a protest last week and there's, 70 people. And so you face those roadblocks of how can you keep carrying the community along when these demands are not met? So up till a few weeks ago, there was no justice for Osaze. As Leslie said, we demanded an external investigation. That was not done. We didn't have the officers' names for almost 20 months. There was no sight in terms of really getting this justice. And so that created a lot of fatigue. So that's a huge roadblock, is how do you continue to invigorate members of the community to continue to stand by you, especially when, there's a national climate that does not necessarily support that. And then I think that would be my second point, would be the political pushback from the community, from other members of the community, I would say, that are not supporting us. And we face that often at borough council calls. We had even threats with the Second Amendment against us. There was so much pushback even on the borough council themselves, and really the attitude. And I like what Jeff said about, exceptionalism, that this is State College. Even if it happened here, because first of all, our slogans, but it happened here, then it's like, even if it happened here, it's not like what's happening in the rest of the country. So we got a lot of pushback. This is not Pittsburgh. This is not Philly. Even if this happened here, it's not what's happening in the rest of the country. This is not our police force. We have the good police force. So you don't need to be talking about that here. So I would say those were kind of, they weren't, roadblocks can always be pushed away and overcome, but I would say those were the major areas in terms of direct action and street protest. And Jeff, maybe you can speak more to what was happening in terms of the structural reform and the borough council.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Nunra. I think that's a really good overview of the community parts of it. And just to come right off of that in terms of the government, the political parts of it, to give the really short background of the response to the 10 demands in June was met within, I think, a week or two after a direct action where there was an occupation of the borough lobby for about 2-3 hours. There was a letter written by a member of the borough council that was very supportive, that was then turned by that same member into resolution 1258, which was a response to all 10 demands. It didn't promise to meet every single one, but it comprehensively addressed all of them. It made sense of the community oversight board in terms of, we're going to look at these things. In June, with thousands in the streets for multiple consecutive weekends, the borough council unanimously voted to make resolution 1258 to accept it. And that was after some disagreements, some folks on the borough council raising that they didn't agree with all of it, but then ultimately, when the chips were down, voted for it. And these two things are not separate. When Nunra talks about direct action and the actions in the street, what you said earlier, I think, around a diversity of tactics is so key. These things are not separate. The more people who are engaged, the more people who are in the streets, the more people who are contacting folks that represent them, the more that folks in government know that they're being held accountable. And that influences their actions. Now we are 7 months beyond the passage of resolution 1258, and the composition of the council has changed. And some of the things that were agreed to in that resolution are either very threatened or have flat out not been fulfilled. The council has gone back on their word. For example, the Community Oversight Board, there was a promise in resolution 1258 to pull the funding for that from existing police funds. The 2021 budget does not do that. It creates that oversight board from emergency funds. And we did not include that ask, that demand on a whim. That was specific. That had to do with what we want and what we view in terms of what community we want State College to become. Again, just like Nunra was saying. So at this point, I think, again, it's similar in terms of trying to continually get people interested and activated and engaged. And folks are tired, of course, but continuing to keep people involved and thinking longer term. How can we create a structure that does not have justice hang on one vote, right? How do we make our votes count the year round so that we have a structure in place that is accountable, that is listening consistently?
The listening consistency is the key. And like you said, the accountability is also key. We have been working, and it's nearly March 20th, it's coming up, right? So that's going to be 2 years. And although we have made strides with the borough, and the Mental Health Task Force has done their due diligence and made their recommendations between the borough and the county, and we have the police force looking into a civilian co-responder unit, and the borough actually invested money in the National League of Cities to conduct a race, equity, and leadership training for its staff, and hired them to help them assess and draft a race equity plan for State College. And despite talking to them every Monday night, they have not been forthcoming or transparent with the updates, despite their willingness to locate those resources and implement the process. It has been very painful for nearly 2 years. And the basic thing they could have done 2 years ago was to produce that job description for the diversity, equity, and inclusion position. And they haven't done that either. They have been, they might have been very instrumental in helping push forward what they were not able to do. You will all reflect on the very frequent phrase that I'm told: it's not off the table, Leslie. And I always go back to say, it's not on the table if you're not talking about it, right? This is a frequent roadblock when our discourse becomes only a listening session, and without action and without commitment for over a year, these demands get louder and it sends us back into the street. And yes, we have a constant battle with that fatigue. It's true. It's real. And even just to keep up that pressure. I mean, Mercer, I think you too can speak to the roadblocks that you're experiencing with the SRJI petition and the struggles and the demands for transparency, and even our demands for just making the campus police budget, right? We had to wait for that. We can find out the salary of employees and the university and 6 figures and how much taxes they paid and what they got as a bonus and a perk, but we could not get transparency on the campus police budget. So we know what that looks like. And I know you know about the pushback of trying to get restorative practices infused in the disciplinary system towards students. I think Eleanor and Ben, you can speak to the open letter and what you got pushback, or even the silence. We call for systemic change and reform, and everybody agrees we need it. And yet, what are we getting? We have more faculty and more staff at risk. Okay. and we should do 3 more jobs while we're at it. 3 more task force. I think maybe you can tell us or share, anybody else have any specific roadblock that you want to say before we move on?
Marissa was muted.
Sure. I would echo Leslie's statement about the lack of transparency with university police, and just really raise the distinction between university police departments, which are private police departments, and have not always existed, certainly have not always been armed, but they're not subject to the same reporting requirements that public police departments are. And so the records previously were required to be requested specifically. There was a lot of information and bureaucracy that one had to go through, often just to be denied. The budget breakdown, even the initial budget breakdown we received after an email campaign to the administration, was a pretty kind of vague explanation of how funds were being used. And we've pushed since for a much clearer itemized budget that displays how much is being used on things like weapons and armed gear. And there's still much work to be done in getting transparency from the university, and specifically university police. I'd also say that there are a lot of conceptual roadblocks we've run into, and one of those is really about what safety is and who safety is for. And safety too often looks like white middle-class comfort, and is actually enacting violence on specifically Black people and on low-income and marginalized communities more generally. So often what we see from university police departments as well as public police departments is reliance on fear and on an idea that ultimately use of force is necessary, or ultimately armed police is necessary, or ultimately incarceration is necessary. And is really ignoring, I think, exactly what Nanre has mentioned earlier, which are the community strategies to bring people genuine safety when safety is not provided by the state. And so kind of really looking into what resources we can develop as a community, how we can intervene in the baseline relationships that are unjust and that do lead to instances of harm, how we can deal with those outside of further entrenching hierarchies, racialized hierarchies and violence through policing and incarceration.
Thank you, Mercer. And I think you have the choir here with you tonight. So I think we're all agreeing and we're all nodding. I just want to do a quick round and just hear what the updates are. I'm just thinking the community would like to probably hear what the petitions are, current status, and next steps. If I was to think about it really quickly, I think the SCASD SRO suspension and resolutions are in progress. I think some of it is stalled. But I think mostly in progress, and I'll ask Syria to come back around with that. I think the student rally demands with their resolution are also in progress, and you can speak to those things. The AFAM department on campus with the open letter is partially in progress, and some of their items are stalled. The 320 coalition demands with 9 of the 10 demands are currently in progress, although we have absolutely no movement on the divestment of guns. I think the open letter to the president and policing has stalled and has no help or action to assist with the investigations offered, but maybe we'll hear something different. The restorative justice and police reform measures are in process too, but defunding and discourse has been stalled. So I think if each of you can speak quickly to whether that's an accurate status for your petition or what the next steps are, we'd be lovely and glad to hear that. Who wants to go first?
I will jump in. I dropped something in the chat. I did want to echo something really quickly about roadblocks, and something that I would hopefully, because this is being, televised, encourage folks to do is for the equity efforts, especially watching the board minutes, watching what's coming up in the school board and coming out to support those things are really, really important. Especially when you are in a role and you're a person of color in a role, sometimes the things that you are pushing forward, it can seem as if there's primary personal gain for the reason that you are pushing forward these issues. When COVID-19 was being discussed at the board, I really got an opportunity to see how many people were really aware of what was going on with the school board, because at some point we had 600 to 700 people on the school board meetings. But when it comes to discussing things like the anti-racism resolution and other equity efforts, we have, as Jeff and Nanre and all of you who are here saying, we have the usual individuals that I could not do this work without. I could not do this work without you, but we need more individuals that are aware of what's going on and able to support, if you can, to come to those types of meetings and speak up. It's really important to have that kind of support, to recognize that these are the things that the community wants to see move forward. And really quickly, on the petition, you are correct that they are in progress. I've created several timeline documents with both petitions, cross-reference petitions to ensure that the demands that are very similar, we're working on together. We continue to update the Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group. And we just recently, for example, had a meeting with the upper administration, the superintendent, regarding diversifying the teacher workforce. And I won't take up the time, but we are moving forward with both petitions. So.
Thank you.
And those petitions, again, was a student rally demand submitted to Superintendent Bob O'Donnell and the school board. And then the second one was a petition to address systematic racism and inequalities in the State College Area School District, again, submitted to the superintendent and the school board members. So thank you so much, Dr. Chatters, for your
Correct. Eleanor and Ben, do you have an update for us?
I'll defer to Eleanor.
Hold on. I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I really sadly do not have an update. The precise request
I think the internet lagged.
Okay, we might have lost
The
her.
background in the
Yeah, I think we might have lost you, Professor Brown. Can you hear us?
There's one general comment I'll make, and I think the general status is we haven't made the sort of progress that we hoped for. But one hopeful point I want to make is when you look at where things were around policing and criminal justice in State College a year ago, there has been so much progress in the past year. Now, it's not where we'd like to be. Like, I think as an activist, you're always sort of,
I'm sorry. I think you lost me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're back.
Okay, I apologize. Let me just speak really quickly. I was just saying that the precise request was that the university reevaluate its relationship with the police department in light of what had happened for reasons having to do with the security of members of the community, people of color, persons with mental health challenges, and because there was not transparency. We were very much in the dark, and we felt that what the University of Minnesota had done was the model of the way to deal with the situation. We have not received a response to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Eleanor. And Ben, you were saying?
I would just, the progress that has been made just sort of generally, and I think of, I know Mercer is trying to get more information from the university police, but their policies are public now. She's gotten budget information, like their work, they've been able to dig up so much through their activism. Same thing with the 320 Coalition. I mean, there was basically no movement at all. And you put forward those demands, and they're not all met yet, but there has, it looks like they're going to be putting funding towards mental health services so that mental health professionals are taking the lead in the response to some of these cases. And so there's much more to be done. And I know none of us are satisfied, but what's encouraging about activism at the local level is that you can have much more of an impact than, at the federal level. I think people, they look at what's happening in the news and they just feel powerless, but you can have a real impact showing up at a local town, local council meeting, showing up at a rally. And so just really encourage people to take that time because it can make a real impact.
Is there one pivotal point you've had success in another state, Ben? Perhaps you can tell us if there was a pivotal turning point in that process.
Yeah, so before I came to Penn State, I did work on the death penalty. And so we were in Connecticut, and the campaign there was successful. But it took a number of years, and there were a number of times that we fell short. And 2011 in particular, we had a new governor come in, and the previous governor was against the death penalty or was for the death penalty. A bill had gone all the way to the governor's desk and was vetoed, and we got the new governor, and it was like, oh, now we can finally get this through. And at the last minute, there were a couple of legislators that flipped, and we lost their votes, and it was devastating because you had all these people just put in their heart and energy into this campaign for a number of years and came up short. But people came back and they committed again, and the NAACP was critical in that campaign. We had both the state NAACP and the national NAACP actively involved. And one of the rallying cry in Connecticut was in 2011, Troy Davis was executed. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that case, but an African-American man who was convicted of murdering an off-duty police officer. The only evidence against him was eyewitness testimony, and basically all the eyewitnesses had recanted. So there was basically no real evidence against him, and the state of Georgia still went forward and executed him. And the NAACP was at the lead of that campaign and had hundreds of thousands of people across the country and around the world calling for that execution to be stopped. And though that execution happened, they made a commitment that, this can't happen in other states. And so they put their attention on Connecticut, and we're able to get it repealed there through the NAACP's leadership. So you don't always succeed the first time, but you have to just keep coming back. And I think that's what we're seeing here in State College.
Let that be a word of encouragement to us. I think that's really...
Reminds me of a good quote, Leslie, doesn't it?
Which one, Terry? Would it be an MLK quote, perhaps? Because I'd like to talk about history, hope, and the dream realized next.
Indeed. My brother Dumas reminded us of a Kwanzaa. MLK said, if I can't change your heart with my love, I'll change your behavior with my commitment.
That's right. And clearly we have a panel filled with committed individuals, community organizers, professionals, and we have the dream team sitting right here. So State College, take action and get behind us.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Mercer?
Some updates from us. We, as Ben has said, we have achieved a greater degree of transparency with the university police than we previously had. We also were successful in getting restorative justice practitioners appointed to the many committees and commissions that have recently been created. And though we've presented on restorative and transformative justice to those committees, which has influenced presentations to the Board of Trustees. What's really crucial is to make sure that the places where we're involved in committees in the institution have some teeth and are actually able to sustain the really transformative calls for a different system of justice. I think that one thing that we have been developing over the past 6 months, and that will be crucial to our success, is these community partnerships. University Police's jurisdiction extends beyond the university and includes parts of State College. And so the university policing issue is really an issue for the borough at large. And so working together and really holding the university accountable as a community, developing those ties will be essential going forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other progress that we want to share?
Are you talking to Mercer? Or are you talking to...
Nope. I just wondered if there was any other comment, because I know we're going to wrap it up. We have a couple minutes left. And so I would like to ask our panelists if they're...
Hold on. We didn't hear from 320.
We were just talking about their 9 out of 10 in progress, but Nanre has something else? Okay.
Well, so I'll run through our 10 demands, and I think it's a little bit more mixed than that. I'll start with the ones that I think are probably most positive, and I'll let Nanre speak to the ones that she mentioned before, numbers 7 and 10. But a few of those demands are either met or close to met. A lot of the ones around transparency, we've had a lot of success there. So the police department released their policy manual with redactions. They did release some statistics on use of force and policing with regards to race. There was already a ban on knee holds and choke holds at the time, which the release of that policy manual was able, and those presentations over the summer was able to confirm for us, which was good. So those 3 are more or less completed or close to it. There were some barriers in terms of release of body cam footage, but due to state law, but we are hopeful that the Community Oversight Board will get automatic access to that. The Community Oversight Board is in action right now, in the sense of almost being put into place. So it will be in place. We are concerned about what the nature of that board could be. The council, based on their most recent work session, seems poised to potentially ignore some of the recommendations, some really key ones from the study committee that worked for 4 or 5 months very hard and held a lot of different public listening sessions on what should we include in this board. In terms of demands that have been really halted, like Leslie mentioned, divestment of guns from 302 warrants, a lot of hope on the mental health task force, and that's really not been mentioned at all. So there's a lot of work needed there. And I think that is most of them except for demands 7 and 10. Henry, if you want to speak to those.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, so the demands that I'm speaking about are the demands for justice, and I think sometimes it's interesting because some of the hardest demands and the most radical demands will probably be the most difficult to implement. And so the release of the names of the officers were actually released, but interestingly, it was, people say due to our work, but actually the actual legal ramification was actually that it was a legal case, not 320's case, but the case of the family that actually forced the borough to release the names of the officers. And so that came as a surprise to us. I mean, we'll take it. But the two other parts, which is the firing of the officers and them being held accountable for their crimes, is the next step. And so we have to now work towards saying, okay, this has been done. What do we do next? And the second area I would say is moving resource reallocation of police funds or the funding of police. There was a complete pushback against that. The borough council actually decided to invest more in the police. So it was in some ways it was a complete boomerang, and it's just basically, I think what happens when you have that is to come back to the strategizing table. And 320 is currently, especially direct action, we as a steering committee are coming back and saying, okay, we need to re-strategize, we need to rethink about some of these demands that we've not made any progress on. How do we now transform and continue advocacy, but using different strategies?
Thank you, Nanre. And so quickly, if I want to return to the fact, I would like the ask. So for any of these actions, what kind of support would you like to see from the State College community and or the Center County region or the borough in order to move these things forward, or the school district?
I can go. we need everyone on board. We need volunteers of every kind. We have different committees. We have structural reform, we have legal, we have direct action, we have education. Like anywhere where your talent is, we need you to join the coalition. We also need partner organizations. So a lot of the amazing work that's going on with all the partners that spoke today, we really want to know. We've spoken about a community-wide meeting to discuss like how these different strategies can come together. That would be really amazing, because many of these petitions have overlapping demands, and it would be great if we can kind of form like a not a single strategy, but at least be on the same page and know what are the multiple ways that we're dealing with that. So we would love to, have more community partners join us. And right now we're pushing also for people to be part of government. Like you have to put your, you got to put your head in there. You have to get in the ring. We need people to run for borough council that are progressive. We need people to come to borough council meetings. We need people on the school boards. Like they're all hands on deck, basically. So, I mean, if you're interested in any way in doing any of this advocacy work, there's a place for so many different talents and abilities, and we just invite you to join the coalition, and to also, if you're a partner organization, to reach out to us. We'll also be reaching out to you so that we can continue to work and build on each other's work.
Absolutely.
I would like to say that one of the key things, because I want to make sure that I'm doing my sitting in for Dr. Young Justice, Dr. Young Justice, I want to make sure that I mention two of the biggest petition points, which was the removal of school resource officers from schools, as well as a moratorium on suspensions, because the district was recently cited by the Pennsylvania Department of Education of the disproportionate discipline of Black students with special education needs. And that information, there have been several school board meetings that have been held about that, in which we have put forward plans that we are working on rectifying that. Very soon, one of the key action points on removing school resource officers from schools, there was a counter petition that was filed by a large group of community members that was pushing to keep school resource officers in schools. But what came across very clearly is that there was a lot of individuals within our community that don't even know what school resource officers are and what they do in schools. So one of the key action points that we have been doing within the district is, first, we were doing a complete report on what is the role, what are school resource officers doing in our schools, and what parts are they playing within our system. What I would encourage people out there to do is, if getting involved in things within the school district is important to you, that A, keeping up with this information is really important, and B, if you contact me at scasdeequity@scasd.org, there is the Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group has started a listserv that is keeping individuals updated on the information that is going on in the district when important meetings are coming up that you would like to be involved in. When this report is coming out, it's important for individuals to come forward and to be present in those spaces, especially to have knowledge of what is going on and to be able to speak up on the issues that you are concerned with. And as Nanre indicated, we definitely need individuals who are interested in running for the school board. Of course, I cannot directly recruit anyone because I'm a director within the district. But I would say that within all institutions, that when you need individuals, diverse individuals, in spots that are leading those institutions. And so when the opportunities come up, I'm hoping that diverse individuals within our community will step forward to serve.
Absolutely. Step forward to serve. That's your call to action, community members. Step forward to serve, no matter what capacity that is. It also speaks to the dream realized for Dr. King, wanting each of us to take up the torch for ourselves and for our communities as collective work that we were talking about. And so I encourage all of you who have been motivated in honor of Dr. King's legacy, please share with me a quote or an impact that kind of speaks to your motivation, your efforts, or your advocacy. I think Eleanor had a brilliant one that she started with that she might think to share if she rejoined us. Can she hear us?
She's not online right now, so she's
No,
not.
I thought her camera was gone, but I thought she might still be here. But she said, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. She said, lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection.
Right. So this is what I'll ask you guys to do. First of all, I want to thank each one of you for taking the time to be on this panel. The work that you guys are doing is absolutely amazing, and keep it up. I want to also tell State College to get involved in any of these initiatives that you heard tonight. But as you tell your quote, I will remove you from the panel and bid you adieu. So let's start with you, Mercer. What is your MLK quote?
My quote is from his mountaintop speech, and it is, "Let us develop a dangerous kind of unselfishness."
Powerful one. Mercer, thank you for your time and your energy, and I'm going to put you on the back side of the screen.
I think Saria's up next with her quote.
Ooh, my quote comes with a tiny bit of explanation. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So my quote is, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. And one of the key pieces that makes that important to me is, as organizations, especially educational organizations, we stand strongly with those alumni that we feel represent who we are. But we also have to recognize that those alumni that have been systematically oppressed within our organizations, what they become, we're responsible for that too.
That's right.
Dr. Chatter, is always a pleasure. And you know what? I know you and I will be doing some work together this the next couple of weeks. So I'll be seeing
you tomorrow.
I'll be seeing you tomorrow.
Always, right? I will see both of you very soon.
Thank you.
Dr. Chatter, thank you so much for tonight.
I think Jeff is up next.
Okay, so my quote is short. It's from Beyond Vietnam. And I'm also just going to point out, in the interest of local involvement and mutual aid and imagining a society that is different and better, it's also one that 4CR posted on their social media. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values.
Absolutely, a radical revolution of values.
Jeff, it's always a pleasure, Jeff. And again, I'm pretty sure I'll be seeing you soon as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Nanre, you're up next. You have to unmute.
It's like the 2020 call of
If
action
I don't
itself.
do it, you'll hear all children running around and all kinds of stuff. So I always make that mistake. So I've been reading a lot this week about Martin Luther King and his work on ending war and militarism, and it made me think about what he would be saying today and what work he'd be doing about policing in the country. And so when I use the word militarism in this quote, I think we should also think about a militarized police force that we have today. So my quote is from King's speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference on March 30th, 1967. And he said, "The evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and racism. The problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power."
Absolutely. We do call our communities for a radical redistribution of political and economic power. Indeed, you are correct, Nanre. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you for spending time with us this evening.
Thanks
Thank you,
for
Nanre.
having me. Take care.
Ben?
So my quote comes from a letter from a Birmingham jail, which my students will be reading next week. "We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation."
Perfect. Thank you very much. It speaks to our tireless efforts as a coalition of people and community members, and all of our good works that we could not do without being co-workers of God. So I do thank you. And as we move forward and become allies against the forces of social stagnation, thank you, sir. Thanks, Ben. It was great having you.
Thank you, Ben. Well, Leslie, I guess it's us two again. Well, for me, which is funny because you and I, we both visit the MLK Memorial in Atlanta, Georgia. And the background that we currently have right now is a picture that I actually snapped, which I'm not a photographer, but this one really, I think, to me, speaks to me, to my spirit, and definitely to a lot of the energy that allows me to do the work that I do. So, and that one is simple. It's "We will not be satisfied until justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream."
Like a mighty stream, yeah.
Yeah.
And change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, right?
Mhm.
But it comes through our continuous struggle. So we
Exactly.
are vocal, and we are a determined group of community members organizing for social change. And when we bring our requests for reform, or we share our lived experiences regarding the inequities we experience every day, and if you are in power, if you are an ally, then we expect you to move and to use your power to change. And we expect to work together for resolution. This is what solidarity looks like. And it is a powerful marching refrain to us still today. And we are better together and able to do so much more. Accountability is key. And as we move forward towards equity and justice, we call for the community to take action, and we ask for your commitment. We will continue to encourage discourse and make our demands and mobilize for change. Our challenges, some so basic, but so interconnected, so demanding for decades because of Dr. King. We are, and like he says, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. And that too comes from the Birmingham jail.
Indeed, it does. So we urge you to join the movement for racial justice. It is a marathon and it's not a sprint. Again, like Leslie reminded us, discourse, demands, resolutions, and a call to action. I think that's the most important piece, is a call to action. You got to do this by raising your voice to dismantle systematic racism, establish equity advocates in your offices, your churches, your towns, your cities, and throughout our country. And tune in and discuss and know how to intervene. Support those who do the work daily. You met some tonight. And become part of the solution.
Absolutely. We want to be part of the solution. We are not the problem. We are part of the solution. And so we want to express our thanks to each of our panelists for their vision, their passion, their persistence, and their leadership. As social activists, they have all worked to provide and to guide and to promote and transform government policies and practices for the benefit of our community. Our influence and our actions have been evident, and we have made progress. So let's keep getting into good trouble until the victory is won.
Indeed, indeed. And on behalf of the State College NAACP, thank you for watching. We hope you have been encouraged, you've been inspired to be the change. We are the ones you've been waiting for. Let's make it happen together. Everyone,
Absolutely.
have a great night.
Have a good night.